Picture the scene. A bodybuilder walks into a sports science lab. He has broad shoulders, thick arms, the kind of physique that takes a decade of relentless work to build. He has lifted hundreds of kilograms across thousands of sessions. By every visible measure, he is the definition of physical strength. A researcher places electrodes on his forearms and asks him to push against an immovable bar with everything he has. When the readout appears, the number is certainly impressive. It is exactly what you would expect from a man who has dedicated his life to getting stronger. Now, a second man enters the lab. He is lighter, leaner. He has never bench pressed in his life. He has never followed a periodization program, never tracked his macros, never done a single set to failure. His training, conducted every morning before sunrise in a mountain courtyard in central China, contains 0 reps, 0 sets, no barbells, no machines, almost no movement of any kind. Then he pushes against the same bar. And what appears on the readout baffles everyone. The number is higher, measurably and undeniably higher, from a man with less muscle, less weight, and not a single rep to his name. And that result demands an explanation. That result is not mythology. It is what happens when you train the structures that actually determine what a body can produce: the tendons, the nervous system, the deep connective architecture that movement-based training largely bypasses. The Shaolin monks of Songshan Mountain, who refined this exact training system across 1,500 years of daily practice, produced it not by doing more than the bodybuilder. They produced it by doing less. And the science behind it is something the fitness industry has had every financial incentive to ignore. This is the story of how that is possible. And more importantly, why it matters to your body right now. If this is the kind of knowledge you are looking for, consider subscribing. There is much more to be told. Because this story does not start in a laboratory or a modern high-performance center. It starts in a place where strength was actually a byproduct of a much deeper pursuit. In 495 AD, the Shaolin Temple was built among the Song Mountains in Henan Province, in central China. It was not a martial arts school. It was a Buddhist monastery, a place for meditation, scripture, and the quieting of the mind. Physical training was not the goal. Instead, stillness was. But a problem emerged quickly. Monks spending hours each day in seated meditation were becoming physically fragile, sedentary, unable to defend themselves or travel safely in a country where monasteries were regularly targeted by bandits and warlords. The temple needed something that could build genuine physical capability without contradicting the meditative discipline at the center of everything they practiced. Something that built the body without disturbing the stillness. What emerged from that constraint, refined over centuries, passed from teacher to student in the same courtyard on the same mountain, was something the Western world would not develop a scientific framework to explain until the late 20th century. It was not a workout. It was the deliberate practice of generating maximum muscular tension while the body remained completely still, holding positions of mechanical load for extended durations. No counting of repetitions, no moving weight, just tension, sustained, disciplined, and repeated, until the body had no choice but to adapt. The foundational practice was called MABU, the horse stance. Feet wide, knees bent, thighs parallel to the ground, spine upright, arms forward. A position that looks, to modern eyes, like a rest between exercises. The monks held it for 20 minutes at a time, daily, for years. And what was happening inside the body during those 20 minutes is the reason that the man in the laboratory produced a number that surprised the researcher. But to understand it, to really understand why this matters and why the fitness industry never told you, you need to understand a distinction that changes everything about how you think about building a body. There are two fundamentally different kinds of muscle, and the gym mostly gives you one of them. The first kind has a name in exercise physiology: sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. It refers to the enlargement of the fluid-filled compartments within the muscle cell. The growth that produces visible size increases. This is primarily what high-repetition gym training produces. The muscle looks bigger because it is bigger, and some of that size translates to strength. This is not worthless, but it is incomplete, because the structures that actually determine what a body can withstand, the tendons, the connective tissue, the deep stabilizing architecture that transfers force from muscle to bone, respond to an entirely different stimulus. And that stimulus is not the rep. A landmark study published in the Journal of Applied Physiology measured tendon stiffness in subjects following 12 weeks of isometric training. Tendon stiffness, the quality that allows force to be transmitted rapidly and completely without energy being lost in loose tissue, increased significantly. The mechanism was a structural change in the tendon itself. The collagen fibers realigned in response to sustained high-tension loading. In 2019, a systematic review by Orenchuk and colleagues analyzed 26 separate peer-reviewed studies on long-term training adaptations. The conclusion was specific and uncomfortable for anyone who has spent years counting reps. High-intensity isometric contractions, sustained holds at 70% or above of maximum voluntary contraction, produced measurable increases in tendon thickness and stiffness. Dynamic training, the rep-based work that dominates modern gyms, did not produce the same effect, regardless of load, regardless of volume. What does tendon stiffness actually mean in practice? It means that when the muscle contracts, the force reaches the bone faster, more completely, with less energy lost. It means the joint is protected by a structure that can absorb and redirect load without failing. It means the body is harder to damage and more capable of generating explosive force from a stationary position, precisely the requirement of a martial artist who needs to move from complete stillness to maximum output in a fraction of a second. The monks holding the horse stance for 20 minutes were building tendons that the bodybuilder doing 3 sets of 12 was not touching. But the tendon was only the first adaptation, because something else was happening inside the nervous system during those holds, something that the research describes as the most efficient method of recruiting the muscle you already have. And this is where it gets genuinely surprising. When you perform a dynamic exercise, a squat, a press, a row, your nervous system manages the effort through rotation. Different groups of motor units take turns firing, each contributing to the movement before resting while others take over. This is efficient for sustained movement, but it means that at any given moment during a typical set, a significant portion of your available muscle fibers are not being recruited. A sustained isometric hold changes this entirely. When a muscle is asked to maintain maximum tension against a position it cannot move out of, the nervous system has no rotational strategy available. There is no movement to distribute the effort across. Every motor unit must fire simultaneously, or the position collapses. The body is forced to recruit everything at once because the alternative, losing the hold, is not permitted. Research on motor unit recruitment confirms exactly this. Isometric contractions at high intensity produce broader, simultaneous muscle fiber recruitment than equivalent dynamic contractions. The Shaolin had no concept of motor units. They could not have explained what was happening inside the muscle. But the practice they developed and refined across 1500 years produced precisely the neural adaptation that the research would later confirm. They called this quality Jin, an internal force, something distinct from visible muscular size, built through sustained tension rather than through the accumulation of movements. A Shaolin master observing a bodybuilder would not have said the man was strong. He would have said the man had size. These were not the same thing. And here is where Wolff's law enters the picture. a principle that the monks also had no name for, but practiced with extraordinary precision every single day. Bone, like muscle and tendon, adapts its architecture in response to the mechanical loads placed on it. Sustained static load, the kind produced by holding a deep horse stance for 20 minutes, places consistent compressive and tensile forces on the femur, the tibia, and the hip joint. Over time, those forces produce measurable increases in bone density at the sites of loading. The monks were not just building force output, they were building the biological architecture capable of sustaining it. Denser bones, stiffer tendons, and a nervous system that could call on everything at once. All of it without a single rep. But there is a fifth adaptation, the one that makes the other four possible to access. And it is the one nobody in the fitness industry will ever sell you, because it cannot be packaged, marketed, or measured in a before and after photograph. The Shaolin called it the stillness of the mountain. In physiological terms, it is training the autonomic nervous system to remain regulated under extreme physical stress. The capacity to generate maximum internal tension while the external body stays completely calm. To hold the horse stance for 20 minutes, not through gritted teeth and white-knuckled willpower, but through a nervous system that has learned to treat extreme physical demand as a sustainable state rather than an emergency. Research on intra-abdominal pressure and sustained isometric effort confirms that long-term practitioners develop a superior capacity to manage the internal bracing mechanism that protects the spine under load. Not because they are suppressing the discomfort, because the nervous system has been trained through thousands of hours of sustained holds to regulate arousal during maximum effort in a way that prevents the premature muscular failure that ends most people's attempts at sustained tension. This is the adaptation that produces the result in the laboratory. Not a single superhuman quality, but 5 interlocking adaptations: tendon architecture, collagen density, simultaneous motor unit recruitment, bone structure, and autonomic regulation, all produced by the same practice, all building on each other, all absent from a training system built around the rep. 3 sustained isometric holds performed daily for 30 days will produce measurable changes in tendon stiffness, motor unit recruitment, and positional strength that months of conventional gym training may not reach. This is not a replacement for dynamic training. It is the missing layer beneath it, the foundation that determines how much of your visible strength is actually usable when the situation demands it. Start with the horse stance. Feet 2 shoulder widths apart. Thighs as close to parallel with the ground as your mobility allows. Spine upright, arms extended. Generate maximum tension throughout the entire body, not just the legs, but the core, the shoulders, the forearms, the hands. Hold for 30 seconds, then 60 seconds, then 2 minutes, then longer. The monks who trained on Songshan Mountain held it for 20 minutes as a foundational daily practice. You do not need to match that today. The biology has not changed since 495 AD. Every second of sustained tension you add is building something. The rep counter on your gym wall will never measure, and something the man who walked into that laboratory, lighter and quieter than the bodybuilder beside him, had been building every morning before sunrise since the age of 6. The Shaolin did not build their bodies to look strong. They built them to be undamageable. And the method they used has been practiced on the same mountain, in the same courtyard, at the same hour every morning, for 1,500 years, waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. Subscribe. There is far more where this came from, and most of it has been hiding in plain sight far longer than the modern gym has existed.